You bought them late in August, that heavy paper sack sagging at the bottom, the tomatoes warm from the roadside stand, and the peppers piled on top. You carried them in and set them on the counter, and you meant to get to them. You told yourself Sunday, then Tuesday. By the third day, the bag had gone soft at the seams. When you lifted it, the bottom gave a little damp against your palm, and that smell came up at you, sweet and sour and turning, the smell of good food gone past saving. A tomato had split and wept into the paper. The peppers had wrinkled and slumped. You stood there a moment, then you did the only thing left to do. You carried the whole sack out to the hens and tipped it into the yard. Count what went with it. That was maybe $9 of tomatoes, another 4 or 5 in peppers, money you had already handed across the counter and could not get back. Do that a few times across one summer, and you have thrown away a week of groceries into the dirt, and the hens do not even thank you for it. Here is the part that stings once you see it. Those very same tomatoes did not have to end in the yard. They could have been jars, clean glass jars standing in a row on a shelf, deep red, sealed tight, keeping for a year or more while you ate through the winter. The better ending was not somewhere far off. It was sitting right there on your own counter the whole time. Inside the very fruit you bought, you had the food. You just did not have the one thing that turns a paper sack of spoiling produce into a pantry. And I want to say this plainly to you before we go a step further. This was never your fault. Nobody ever sat you down and showed you the single line that decides everything. The one line that separates a jar that feeds your family for a year from a jar that can quietly harm them. It is not a hard line. It is not a secret. But if no one ever taught it to you, you cannot be blamed for not knowing it. And most people were simply never taught. So set the guilt down. You did not waste that food out of carelessness. You wasted it out of a gap that was never yours to fill alone. Now let me take you into a kitchen I saw not long ago, out in Lancaster County, and hold you there a while. It is a plain room, wide and warm. Along one wall, a propane burner roars low and steady under a big pot. No cord, no outlet, no dial glowing anywhere. Inside that pot, the water rolls hard, and down in the water sit mason jars packed with chicken, submerged to the shoulders, the pale meat pressed to the glass. Every so often a lid rattles, a faint metal tick against the boil, the only sound the jars make. That pot has been standing there most of 3 hours, not 10 minutes, not 1 hour. The woman tending it counts her canning of meat in hours, and the rule she keeps is a long, hard boil, 3 hours at the least before those jars are fit to seal and carry down cellar. There is no thermometer stuck in anything. There is no pressure gauge to read, no needle to watch climb. There's only the clock on the wall and the sound of the water and her own long habit telling her when it is done. On the counter beside her, other jars are already put by. Red beet eggs sit in their brine, the eggs gone dark where the vinegar and beet juice have soaked in deep, a purple so heavy it looks near black in the glass. And in a small separate pan of hot water, a single canning lid soaks by itself, not fresh from any box, saved from a batch before and clean to be used one more time. Nothing in that room is bought that could be kept. Nothing is thrown out that could be used again. But that pot, that 3-hour pot of chicken boiling and boiling with no gauge and no dial is where I need you to keep your eyes. Because a boil that long feels like it must be enough. It feels like more than enough. Hold that thought and do not settle it yet. Because whether that long boil truly makes those jars safe is a real question. And it is not a small one. Stay with the steam a moment longer. In that quiet steam sat the whole question I mean to answer for you. And it is not the one you would guess. In that quiet steam sat the whole question I mean to answer for you. And it is not the one you would guess. The question is not how a poor family eats. The question is how a jar keeps a family alive instead of ending it. Before I take you further, you should know whose hands these are. My name is Sadie, and I have put up the garden every August since I was 9 years old. I am no butcher, and I will never pretend to be one. The killing floor belongs to the men and to the frolic. What is mine is the seasoning crock, the canning kettle, and the cool, dark cellar, where the jars wait out the winter. That is the work I can teach you, because it is the work these hands have done for more than 40 years. Now let me be honest with you before I promise a single thing. The $50 a week in the title is my own challenge, set against a real number I can point to. It is not a verified Amish household budget, because no such figure has been written down that I could find. What I know of these plain kitchens comes from accounts written for the wider world, from books and interviews, not from a scholar's study. So I will not dress it up as more than it is. I will show you the method. I will show you the honest math later, and I will let you weigh it yourself. Now here is the first thing, and it is the line that decides everything. The number is pH 4.6. That is the acid line. The same jar, the same stove, the same steady boil can turn out a safe supper or a deadly one, and the only difference is what you put inside. This is not a story I inherited from a grandmother. This is settled science from the USDA and the extension offices, plain and unanimous. In a low acid food, there lives a spore that is odorless, that you cannot see, that you cannot smell, and that a hard boil will not kill. A jar can look perfect on the shelf and still hold death. So the acid is not a detail. The acid is the whole safety of the pantry, and I want you to hold that number in your mind. Now let me show you the first real method, the one that lives inside that safe side of the line. We call it the boiling water bath, and it is only ever for high acid foods. That means the fruits. That means tomatoes with acid added back, because a tomato alone can drift over the line. That means pickles and jams and jellies. You pack your jars and you seal them, and then you set them down into a great pot of water until they're covered over, and you bring it to a rolling boil at 212 degrees. There is no single magic number for how long. I want you to hear that clearly. The time changes with the food, with the size of the jar, and with how high your kitchen sits above the sea, and you look it up every time from a tested recipe. You do not guess, and you do not trust one number for everything. Here is the physical tell, the part your own eyes and ears will give you. You push the jars down under the water until the rolling boil closes over the lids. You keep them there for the tested time. Then you lift them out and set them on a folded towel, and you wait and you listen. One by one, as they cool, the lids begin to ping. It's a small, bright metal sound, and it is the sweetest sound in a canning kitchen. That ping is the center of the lid, pulling down and drawing tight, sealing the jar as the steam inside turns back to a vacuum. You can press the middle with a fingertip, and a good lid does not give. That drawn down lid is your proof. So the acid is the whole line between a safe jar and a deadly one. And now I must show you what happens when the acid is not there at all. So the acid is the whole line between a safe jar and a deadly one. And now I must show you what happens when the acid is not there at all. Most vegetables have no acid to speak of. All meat, all poultry, all fish, they sit above that line too. For these, there is only one safe road, and that is pressure canning. Boiling water tops out at 212 degrees, and you can boil a jar all day and never climb higher. But the spores that hide in low acid food are stubborn. They laugh at boiling water. They only die when the heat climbs to 240 or even 250 degrees, and the only way to reach that is under pressure at 10 to 15 pounds. Now let me show you how you know the pressure is right, because it is not a number you read, it is a sound you learn. The weighted regulator sits atop the canner and it jiggles. You want it to rock gently, 1 to 4 times a minute, no more. That soft rattle is your whole gauge. My own canner is an all-American, made by the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry up in Manitowoc, where they have turned these out since the 1930s. It seals metal to metal, an oiled, beveled lip you seat by hand, with no rubber gasket to wear out and replace. You wipe that lip, you set the lid down true, and you tighten the wing nuts across from each other. That heavy iron holds the heat where the spores cannot follow. When the time is up, you do not rush. Now let me tell you why the waiting is part of the work, and not a bit of it wasted. You take the canner off the fire and you let it come down on its own. You never run cold water over it, never pry the weight to hurry it. Part of the killing happens right there in that slow cool down, while the jars still hold their heat. Rush it and you undo some of what you worked for. So I sit, I wipe my counter, I let the iron sigh its way back to quiet. There's one more guard I keep, and it is a modern one I'm glad to follow. Before I taste any low acid food I've put up, I boil it in an open pot for 10 full minutes. If you live up high, you add a minute for every 1,000 feet above the first 1,000. For spinach and for corn, you give it 20 minutes no matter where you stand. This is not old wives' caution. It is current guidance from the people who study these things, and it will break down any toxin that slipped past a jar that's sealed wrong. 10 minutes at the stove is a small rent to pay for a safe supper. Now let me be honest with you about the clock on the shelf, because a jar is not forever. You use what you put up within about a year for the best eating. You never hold it past 2 years, not even when the lid is still drawn down tight and sealed. Keep your jars below 85 degrees, cooler if your cellar allows, for heat steals quality faster than cold ever will. Even so, a jar of green beans holds far steadier than a basket of fresh ones. Fresh corn from the market goes soft in days, and every soft ear is money in the bin. A jar sits patient through the winter. That is the quiet arithmetic of canning against buying fresh that spoils before you can eat it. Not everything needs a jar at all. Some of my harvest goes down to the root cellar. No heat, no lid, no pressure. Down there it is only cold and dark and damp, just a breath above freezing, and that alone slows the food's own breathing to a crawl. Potatoes keep for months. Carrots, cabbage, apples, they all rest in that earthy cool and hold their weight. But it only serves the right foods. A thing that is naturally full of moisture will still spoil down there, cellar or no. So you learn which crops belong on those shelves and which must go in a jar. The cellar and the canner do different work, and a full pantry needs them both. But a full cellar is only half the story, because the richest lessons I have seen sit on one Lancaster County counter. But a full cellar is only half the story, because the richest lessons I have seen sit on one Lancaster County counter. In a kitchen documented near Ephrata, the stove runs on propane, not on power drawn from the grid. A canner of chicken jars boils there for hours. Beside it, a single lid soaks in a small pan of hot water, fished out and used again to save a few pennies, though some canners still buy new lids for meat because the process runs so long. On that same counter sit jars of chow chow, that sweet and sour relish, and home salsa, put up for a shelf of a year, maybe two. Now let me show you the jar I love best on that counter, the red beet eggs. When you pickle beets, you're left with a deep vinegar brine, dark as garnet, and most hands would pour it down the drain. We do not. You peel your hard-boiled eggs and slip them into that leftover brine, and you let them stand near 6 weeks. The vinegar colors them clear through, red at the edges and pale gold at the heart. A byproduct becomes a second food. Nothing worth eating leaves my kitchen as waste. I will tell you plain that not every family kept a garden the same way. Where a church district forbids a home freezer, folks found other roads. Some rented a locker from an English neighbor. Some pooled money for a shared cold shed. Some cut pond ice by hand into an ice house. And some set food out on a cold sun porch through the deep of winter. I name these only so you understand why canning and cellaring came to sit at the center of our pantry, never as a method for you to copy. Now the honest math, because I promised you honesty. The USDA's thriftiest plan puts a family of 4 near $229 a week by their December figures. A home garden runs about $260 a season, and once you price your own labor, it can land anywhere from a small loss to a real gain. So the savings are true, but the hours are not free. That $50 in my title is my own framing, a challenge I set against that big grocery number, not a proven Amish figure. I will not sell you a number I cannot stand behind. So tell me down below, what did your grandmother put up that no store could ever sell you? I read every single one. Next time, I will carry you out to the cold barn in December, where our whole church district turns 2 hard days into a butchering frolic. And I will show you how I fill my shelves with sausage and scrapple and canned meat from that one weekend of work. So come sit at my table again for that one. And remember, a plain life makes a full pantry, one honest jar at a time.